I went through that myself where you have a fixed amount of capital, especially when you're starting out. Picture it as a team, as a professional sports team with a very low budget. And I have a salary and I have my own salary cap and I'm trying to stay within the cap. So I'm trying to fill my roster and I don't want to overspend in one department without, leaving me exposed in another department. And I think to your point, building that bench strength where you can really start develop and then building the bench strength within each department. And then you start growing organically and growing and having people internally being promoted. It's when you're starting out, you're not even thinking that. You're thinking about, I've just got to fill these spots. I need somebody to sell franchises. I need somebody who's in charge of franchise training and support. You're not even thinking about the second, third, fourth person in each department. But I always talk about hiring for your weakness because to me, that's what, in my experience, that's what changed everything. When I realized that I couldn't be the end all and be all for my company, I needed people who did the things that I wasn't good at. And there was certainly a lot of things that I was not good at that I needed people to do. That's kind of the founder getting out of the way, right? And that's got to be pretty hard for people. I would imagine all the franchise systems you've been around. Tell me about sort of the challenge with founders.
Well, I think that, I mean, personally, I take that same lesson to heart myself. I've built an organization where almost everybody in the whole organization is smarter than I am, and they're more experienced than I am, and that's really the key to our success. I think that good leaders are not afraid to hire people that are better than themselves. The biggest challenge for good leaders is being able to afford those people. So when you first get started, you want to hire the best. Maybe you can't afford to always hire the best, and you have to do a lot of work developing those people. But the key is, surround yourself with people that will challenge you. Surround yourself with people that are that you consider to be, smarter than you, that you consider to be as dedicated as you are, and make sure that they have that same attitude of focused on franchisee success. I've gone into organizations where I've heard, and these are more mature, we work with mature franchisors as well as startups. And I've heard people who have this us versus them kind of mentality about the franchisees. And as soon as I hear that, I know that the organization's in trouble. Because if the people in the organization are talking poorly about the franchisees, then the first thing that you know is that came from the top, because the top is tolerating that kind of an attitude toward franchisees. And if that's what's going on in the organization, then you are going to have an organization that's going to be dysfunctional. You're going to have an organization where it's us versus them, and it's not going to be easy to cure the problems that are going to arise in that organization.
Yeah. But there at the same time, there's this franchise or franchisee relationship where there can be a very healthy push pull. We may not always agree on what we need to do, or I should say, we may not always agree on how we're going to do something, but we have to agree that this is good for the brand moving forward. And that kind of introduces the whole franchise advisory council. Most emerging franchise brands, when you're starting out, you don't have an FAC, as we call it in franchising, where we have a group of franchisees who are representing, whether it's their region or by revenue tier or whatever, to have that voice or that seat at the table, right? And Mark, at what point does a franchisor determine we're large enough now where we're too big to have every franchisee having a seat at the table on big strategic decisions, but we need to have an advisory council? Where does that come in, and how does that? What usually makes that a big decision now, and where does that start?
Well, we're big advocates of franchise advisory councils. We'd like to see them started as soon as possible, and even if it's only several members to begin with, we'd like to see them get started from the very beginning of a franchise organization. The sooner the better. There is obviously a push-pull between the franchisor and the franchisee. The relationship is not always perfectly aligned in terms of what people's interests are. Franchisees are concerned with what goes on in their individual territory. The franchisor has to be concerned with the brand and what is happening with the brand overall. Now, there may be differences between those two different goals, but the key is transparency and listening to the other person's opinion. Ultimately, the franchisor has to make those decisions, but the more input you get from your franchisees, um, the better off you are. Ray Kroc had something that he used to say. He said that that he listens to his franchisees because that the franchisees are listening to the consumers every day, and sometimes they're listening, and what they have to say is pretty important. So these are listening to the franchisee and listening to what the franchisee has to say is important because they are right in front of the consumer every day.
That's so true. And we also learn as a franchisor that it's not just training them on how to operate the business, but business coaching is a huge aspect of that relationship, because I think most franchisees, it's their first time going into business. And sometimes as a franchisor, I know I experienced this where I underestimated the amount of value I was going to have to put towards business coaching. I thought more about I had to train these franchisees on how to operate the business and how to hire and scale their own business, but I didn't recognize early on the value of business coaching. And of course, I quickly transitioned to that, right? And that's something that we may not focus on enough in franchising, is the importance of coaching these franchisees in their own business.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are entrepreneurs. I mean, most of the people that are probably watching your podcast here are probably entrepreneurs, and from their perspective, they are probably people that do a lot of things for themselves, and they sort of cut their own path. But the people who are franchisees are not like the entrepreneurs who start businesses on their own. And one of the things that I hear this an awful lot from my clients, that where they'll say, "Why would somebody buy a franchise from me when they could just do this on their own?" And it would be so simple for them to do it on their own. And I say, the largest carpet cleaning franchises are all franchise. The largest janitorial services franchise businesses are all franchises. The largest lawn care businesses are all franchises. You go down the lists of some, the largest maid services businesses are all franchises. You go down the list of some businesses that most people on their surface would say are relatively simple businesses, but they're all franchises. Now, why is it that people are buying into those franchises? It's because that they're not entrepreneurial. They are people that are out there looking for some sense of direction. Now, they may have some entrepreneurial spirit, and ideally they're willing to take some risks, and they're willing to invest some capital, and they're willing to make some decisions. But they got into a franchise originally because they were looking for somebody else to take the lead and somebody else to provide that direction. And that's your role as a franchisor, to take that lead, to provide that direction, and to make the continual changes to the business model that allow them to make more money and allow you to make more money. You think about your own experience with I-9 and the introduction of the uniforms and what you ended up doing with that, that and how that became a profit center for them and for you in that business. It's something where you don't want to leave that to an individual franchisee to do. This is something that's got to be an initiative where the franchisor takes the lead.
Sure. At the same time, sort of like the story of McDonald's, where a lot of the products, some of the most popular items came from franchisees. I give so much credit to our franchisees in my own company where they wanted to try something and we supported that, but we kind of put a framework around it. Let's test something out, and let's test it out in different areas of the country. And then let's get back together as a team and making sure that it's going to be a right fit for a national rollout. And we had some winners and we had some losers, but similar to McDonald's, some of our best ideas came from an initial franchisee idea of, hey, how they wanted to introduce something. I use T-ball as an example. My background was baseball. I love baseball, but we did not start out even offering T-ball. We started out with flag football and soccer and moved on to basketball. And we had a franchisee in Atlanta who he started wanting to introduce baseball, and then he kind of backed into the youngest kids with T-ball. And we went out there. I went out there personally, and we saw what he was doing, and we kind of developed this program directly here with him, and then got a chance to do a big test. And then it ended up being a big part of our success, so much so that it actually lowered the average age of the kids coming into our business, because we were now taking in 3, 4, 5-year-olds into our business, which meant there was more kids now playing soccer and flag football. All of that came, from a franchisee. And I think that that's why we have to continue to work together. It's, I think it's just fascinating that you get an opportunity in franchising to work with people, franchisees that come from different walks of life. I could never have afforded the skill set and the level of expertise as an employee that I was able to get in franchising. And I think that gets often overlooked on another value on why franchising your concept is so unique and yet so valuable. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.